Hi, everybody. I'm Sunny, and this is We Gotta Talk, a live weekly digital talk show and podcast where we like to dig deep. Real talk, big topics. Now, let's dig in. Hi, everybody. Welcome to We Gotta Talk. I'm so glad you're here with us this week. I have another really interesting episode today on healing trauma, which is a topic that we have covered before here on We Gotta Talk, but never with this spin before. And I really think you're going to love this. Today's guest is Keylee Miracle. She is a hypnotherapist, a teacher, and the founder of the Neurointuitive Method. A quick bio. After experiencing some trauma in her youth, Keylee made it her mission to help high achievers who have seemingly done everything else to heal their trauma, but still feel stuck. I'm really excited to welcome her to the show today. Keylee, thank you so much for being on We Gotta Talk.
Thank you for having me.
I
Excited to be here.
love how in your pitch and when we were going back and forth, your bio says you were the Dan Humphrey of your high school, which to people was it's like just a great allegory. I mean, I came on Gossip Girl really late. I'm a little old for it, but I did binge it as like a 38-year-old a few
Never
years
too
back.
old.
Never too old. But for people who don't get that comparison and allegory, tell us what that means.
Yeah. So, I was the girl from Brooklyn. I was Dan Humphrey, his whole thing, and it's hilarious that Penn Badgley now does you. I mean, that's far
Total
creepier.
departure, right?
But-
Oh my gosh.
Far creepier, but both characters who are observers.
Yes.
So, coming into that environment as sort of an outsider, but I think later as I got older and kind of integrated my own story, I realized I was a little bit less of an outsider than I thought, but I was an outsider in the right ways for me. Into like a, super high achieving, really like Tony, Upper East Side prep school environment coming from, South Brooklyn and parents who really grew up in the British schooling system. It's really a departure.
Tell me more about that. Your parents grew up where?
Yeah, so both of my parents are from the Southern Caribbean, and their schooling system was influenced by the UK. And my dad also, his schooling was UK and then came up here as adults. My parents actually met in Manhattan at Pace University.
Oh,
So,
wow. Oh, that's
yeah,
interesting.
I just gave away so many security questions.
I Everybody, we're going to go back and bleep that. No, I wish we could. Wait, okay, Keylee, I'm really interested in digging in right off the top on this concept of the outsider syndrome.
Yeah.
I feel like I am afflicted with that. As someone who experienced a level of bullying, and listen, I know everybody these days deals with some kind of trauma and some kind of issue that sort of alters the way that they interact with people around them. But I often say that I feel like the experience I had that made me a loner, that made me much more of an observer than a participant, at least growing up, was one of my bigger traumas, but also translated into one of my biggest strengths as an adult, because the power of observation and the power to pull back from the group and to be able to exist independently has really brought me strength as an adult. But it's hard. I still feel like the girl. I still feel like the Dan Humphrey too sometimes. Like I feel you on that. I do.
I like it now, but
Yeah.
at the time, it's
Tell
difficult.
us about the
Yes.
strengths that you find in that too. And we'll get into the neurointuitive method, which is your sort of specific method for healing people's traumas and meeting them where they are. But tell us what benefits there are to feeling like an outsider, because social media would have you believe, or everyone would have you believe, that fitting in is what we should aspire to do. But I disagree.
I completely disagree. I don't think there's there's a U-shaped space in the world. So it's kind of your job to become as much of you as possible.
Mhm.
And that looks different for every person as it's meant to, because again, it's U-shaped. So I think having the experience of being an outsider and going to a school where it's like I couldn't hide my outsiderness if I tried. Like I'm definitely quirky. I'm neurodivergent, so I blurt things out. I just say what I'm thinking. And in an environment, especially when it was kind of like that cookie cutter, sometimes, again, Gossip Girl era, everybody like, what's your pin? Like a certain sort of, yes, because we had Blackberries. I don't know what you know,
Yes, I
12
love the
year. I
BlackBerry,
don't
but
know what,
as an adult, I had one, not as a 12-year-old.
right. What, I don't know why we needed that.
So
But
funny.
just a series of like status symbols and all of these trappings of even the school itself was a trapping, parents and my parents participated in this too. Like, but parents work from almost birth to get their kids into these kinds of schools. And it's really a lot. It's a lot. So you have these kids who are destined on a certain path. They've really been set on a trajectory, and then you have the pressure of just being a kid. You've got a pressure of being a kid with a different socioeconomic class than most of the world, and then you've got me, and it's like I was middle class kid, went to the
Mhm,
school, never really struggled in that way, but of course I didn't have hedge fund money. I was just a normal kid from
mhm,
Brooklyn. Not that those kids are, but you know what I'm saying. Um, so as an outsider, definitely being able to, first of all, observe, notice where people were wounded, notice where people had advantages. I think everybody comes into this world with a certain set of gifts and skills. And again, this U-shaped place that it's your job to become as much of you as possible. Everybody comes into this world with their own bag of stuff.
mhm.
And from 0 to 7, you're mostly unconscious. So that's when a lot of your learnings sink in. So, what stuff you overhear, things your parents tell you, things you observe, and you don't necessarily have like the conscious ability to filter things through. So, a lot of us are just walking around with that. And that can be people who've had really great childhoods. And it's just for everyone. It's just the fact of the matter. Everybody's kind of unconscious those first 7 years. So, people are walking around with that. Now, if you have more difficulty, if you don't have the same, resources and parental love and care or resources financially, you're dealing with a certain set of issues. But everyone has their stuff. And I think when you're an outsider, you can see that very clearly. And I think you also learn how to look at yourself.
Yeah, I think the biggest gift we can be given is being forced out of any societal expectation, whether that's the expectation placed on you as a woman
Hmm.
or a mother, or
Mm-hmm.
in your case, the expectation of a student at an upper crust sort of Tony school. Like sometimes the best gift is the benefit of that perspective. And I was just having this conversation with my sister today, even as a woman, a 41-year-old grown woman, like fully into my life and the narrative of my
Hmm.
life right now. It really is surprising how that sort of group mentality persists no matter the age. And
Hmm.
it can feel challenging to not feel part of the group or part of the system. Or so what were some things that you did and that sort of dovetailed into the work you do now? What gift did you find in yourself at that young age that you sort of nurtured to develop into this that makes you be able to do what you do? Because I don't think you can help heal trauma unless you've experienced it or have been forced to confront it in some way yourself.
Hmm. Yeah. So going through that environment definitely left me with my own set of traumas that I had to work through later on. I
Like, what did
think,
you feel? Name them for us. Like,
ooh.
I mean, like, tell me more, Keely. Like, I'm being your therapist. You don't have to tell us anything you don't want to tell, but like, just so feeling just like an outsider,
Yeah.
or
Feeling isolated,
yeah,
I think there's such a deep insecurity that can really come online in those
right.
preteen years. And the way most people deal with insecurity is to try to find someone to put down. So, dealing with that and dealing with that street sometimes being two-way.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if someone's mean to you, chances are you might be mean back.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so learning about myself in that environment, what do you do when nobody sees you? What do you do when some people see you? What do you do when people misconstrue you? And that's like an ongoing sort of theme because everybody's not going to understand you. Everybody's not going to perceive you correctly at first because everybody's dealing with their own perception, their own again, that stuff is coloring the perception. So for me, I would definitely have these moments where I felt isolated and hopeless and just really, really in a dark place for a kid. And then I think later on, having conversations with my peers as adults, it's so funny, the people who you thought really were doing well or had everything, many of them were dealing with similar struggles, similar
Mhm.
feelings of this inadequacy, of this isolation, of the pain, of being unseen, of feeling like you have to mask all of the time. So that
Mhm.
was the masking was double layered, was double for me because I have again the neurodivergence. So I was diagnosed with ADHD around 22, and then autism, I kind of put the pieces together a couple years after that.
Well, wait, tell me about this. What were you noticing, Keely? And like, what led you to that diagnosis? I'm hearing a lot of
Yeah.
this lately is that people are, I like, whatever, I'll tell you my story after this. But I also had like a recent big revelation about that explained a lot about how I behaved as a child and now. But I'm interested in hearing
Mm-hmm.
what you noticed that led you to those.
Yeah. So I end up working with a lot of like high achievers. And like for me, what I noticed in myself is it's very easy. Like most of the kids in the gifted and talented program, so many of them, they've got some neurodivergence going on, right? So you're right. So they're praised for being this gifted and talented and kind of um, appealing to adults,
Mm-hmm.
really. Um, and that was an experience that I had. Like adults really liked me most of the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? Other
Mm-hmm.
kids, I of course I had friends. I've always been a social person, but sometimes other kids, it's like I just don't get her, and that's okay. But yeah, like appealing to adults, having this high intelligence, really being able to perform and produce, and a lot of it is related back to that masking. Like you kind of learn, like, okay, well, this is expected of me. I can do this and this and
Mm-hmm.
this, and I'll just get praised. So also, I think that was a really important part of that experience going to that school. It was the first time where I wasn't just instantly praised for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And like I wasn't perfect and I wasn't top of everything. Like I got great grades, but I wasn't top of the line. I wasn't, number one all the time. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something that you have to deal with when you're a high achiever. And I think a lot of people don't run into it until they're much older. So
Mm-hmm.
I know that that's helped me. I don't have to be um, as comparative in my like life journey. I don't think learning that lesson helped me with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, ADHD moment.
Pause. Unpause.
Pause.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So,
you work now as a hypnotherapist and you coach people. What's interesting about your method, it's called the neurointuitive method, is that you sort of meet people where they're at and you sort of learn the way they learn. Am I describing this in the proper
yeah.
way? And then help them heal once it's almost like finding the plug in the wall, like where to plug it in, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's so funny. I said that word earlier today. But I usually, yeah, like this morning I was talking about what do I do with leaks? I plug
It's so
them.
funny. Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I think of it more as like a thread because I can hear when people are speaking, and I think this is the power of observation as well. Like usually there's only so many core wounds under the sun. There's one human experience.
Right.
Everybody has a different variation of it, but there's only so many core wounds under the sun.
Give us an example of a couple of core wounds because this is interesting and I think people might be able to hear and connect with one of them.
Yeah. So let's take the inadequacy wound. Um, this could be often the story is something like this. Okay, well, my parents weren't necessarily vocal, or they were only vocal when I performed in a certain way. So I grew to, again, perform for their approval, for their love, and this is like a common immigrant kid story, but I learned to perform for their approval. The only time I received like a certain amount of vocal praise that made me feel good is when I did a certain thing.
Mhm.
So you walk through life looking for that reward. And sometimes the reward is really far off. Um, and you keep hammering at something that isn't going to give you a reward, but you just know if I just keep at it and I keep if I keep at it, if I stay here, if I perform well enough, then eventually there will be a reward. Um, and there can be a wider conversation had about that, especially about UK schooling. But anyway, if I stay
It's
here
interesting.
and I
But basically it sounds like you were shouldering the responsibility and people with this wound would be shouldering the responsibility of achieving not only for their sake, but also the sake of the people who sacrificed to bring them there. It's like almost a
Right.
personal responsibility thing.
It is. And it's not a bad thing to have a certain sense of personal responsibility. We all need it. But at the same time, you can't manipulate people. And
Right.
that's ultimately what develops as kind of a manipulative strategy. And people hear manipulation and they think bad. It's like, no, performing in a certain way to induce people to react to you in a certain way is a heavy masking and it's manipulative.
Oh, that's
And
so
it's
interesting.
draining. So
Hmm.
I meet a lot of people and they've been doing this for many, 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 many years and they're drained because again, the reward's just not coming or they've had the rewards and the rewards don't feel good.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, walk us through some other of the core wounds. And we don't have to like go into everyone, but I do want to just kind of run through so people can kind of hear what, because at the end of the day, like you said, we're all likely dealing with one of these.
Hmm. Yeah. So again, control, that's also interlinked. Um, when people feel out of control early in life, early in childhood, they can create scenarios that either replicate that or really close in on themselves. So they don't really try new things. They don't necessarily experience things because it's hard to trust that they will be okay. So
Hmm.
what that leaves you with is, again, control issues, a damaged relationship with yourself, because ultimately, what do we generally do? We survive. That means you keep going. That means you get to make more decisions. So, what you see with these people often is like an analysis paralysis sort of thing. And they don't move forward. They kind of stagnate because they're a little bit scared of what's ahead because they don't know. And we're not meant to know, but it feels
Hmm.
scarier than it is because they're
Hmm.
approaching it in part from like a fragmented place, and sometimes it's really the child responding.
There's it's so interesting to me. I did a hypnotherapy session with a therapist down here in Orlando, and you
Hmm.
bringing up the phrase inner child just sparked this memory. And I'm sure this is something you address with your clients too, but it was really shocking to me how much of the work involves addressing the inner child and these core wounds. And I think like
Hmm.
we can talk about these things in talk therapy or things that we do with our conscious mind. But when you get
Hmm.
into that state where you're working with a hypnotherapist and you start to realize, oh my God, it all goes back to like my baby self. It's very profound. And as a
Hmm.
mother, it
Mm.
was even more profound to me. Anyway, I would love for you to sort of dive into that, the concept of the inner child. And we sort of work through these early wounds, and everybody,
Hmm.
no one gets through life unscathed, like you said. But like, tell us
Hmm.
about the importance of addressing the inner child in some of these sessions, or just being aware that you even have one.
Yeah, I think treating yourself with tenderness is something you're supposed to do your whole life, and we lose sight of it. I think because the world is very rough, can be very rough on everyone. And I think with
Yeah.
children, we have a more delineated concept in our society for how it is they're to be cared for, what to be protected from, and we lose that. We can lose that when we get older. So when you realize that you're supposed to be treating yourself with tenderness, like all the time, I think you make again more mindful decisions. You choose better things for yourself, and you're more in tune with your emotions. Like I think mothers and often I work with many mothers, they have this realization they've been accepting certain things. And it's like, well, would I want my child to accept certain things? Would I want my child in this situation? And then suddenly it becomes unacceptable and they move. They
Mhm.
shift away from the situation. But you should be able to look at yourself with that same level of grace and compassion and love and care and that preciousness. So the inner child does need that support. And you can continue to mature it. Like it doesn't have to stay wounded. It can literally just be like a whole, healthy, happy inner child that you just take with you on the
Mhm.
on the journey. But sometimes, yeah.
I love that. I never thought of that. I just thought we were
Yeah.
freezing her in time forever and just being like
No.
making it better and then moving on.
She's with you. She's with you. Like I still love Barbies. I don't play with Barbies, but like when I see Barbie related things, I get really happy. The advertising worked, at the core memories work. I get really happy. I love hot pink. Like,
Mhm.
and that also was something I really moved away from because it just didn't seem cool. like to
Right.
be smart and to be competent and to be grown up, you have to be all cynical and so like skeptical of everything, and the things that bring you joy, you're supposed to
Right.
hide it. You don't have to do that.
No, and I think too for women a challenge is letting that frivolous side of their personality flourish and
Mm-hmm.
not being ashamed of it. And I came up with seems about a decade ahead of you in the professional world, but there was a time in my career and life where I altered everything about me, the way I
Mm.
spoke. I cut my hair short. I dyed it a different color to make people think that I was intelligent, and and
Mm-hmm.
to make myself feel more accepted in a room
Yes.
full of usually older men who were in control of the situation. And what
Mm-hmm.
I love seeing now with this like sort of dawn of like a new mental health era is like women are realizing, okay, I can love, and I say this all the time on my channels, it's we contain multitudes. I can love frivolous, stupid, superficial stuff like skincare and not stupid, but
That's not stupid, right?
no, it's
There
right.
you
It's not
go.
stupid.
You don't have
I
to judge
know.
it.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
trained. I'm trained in this stuff. Yes, I'm like, oh, I need to
Mm-hmm.
break that. But yeah, you can contain so many parts that maybe seem at odds on the surface, but it doesn't take away from your profundity as a human being or your
Mm-hmm.
capabilities, whether it's at work or in a relationship or anywhere. And it's just, it sounds so simple, I think, for men, especially because there's not a dual existence for men. I don't want to like make this a man bashing thing. I love men. But as a woman, I'm sure you have many clients too who come to that realization that we can merge all these into one person and not be
Yep.
ashamed of you loving your hot pink or being
Mm-hmm.
drawn in by a good Barbie, commercial or something, and it coexists. But society told us for so long that you couldn't, that you were vain or shallow or
Mm-hmm.
silly or girlish if you did.
Right. And again, what's wrong with that?
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so how did you develop the neurointuitive method? And when you're working with clients, and as we said earlier, you work as a hypnotherapist, so you're teaching people to sort of overcome these core traumas. What's
Mhm.
unique about this method?
Yeah. So I came to it after I feel like I literally tried everything.
Hmm.
So for a very long time, I tried, traditional methods, the things that were supposed to work, quote unquote. Again, with that assuming what gets to have value and what gets to be serious and what gets to be functional and effective. For a long time, I was really resistant to other methods of healing. So,
Hmm.
I was going to talk therapy. I spent about 7 years in talk therapy, like consistent. 7 years in talk therapy. And I could intellectualize up the wazoo about my emotions. And it's
Yeah.
funny because now I actually do talk about this intellectually, but I feel my feelings too. But I could intellectualize about my emotions. I could tell you why I did exactly what I did. I could go through all the logic because I'm a smart person. ADHD is a thing that may make you think that you're not smart past a certain point because it's harder to perform because it's not set up for you to perform. So I was going to talk therapy and I was trying to perform if I was honest about it. And I could talk through my problems. I understood exactly what I was doing, but I wasn't changing fast enough.
Hmm.
It didn't feel like I could do the right thing logically. I could make the logical choice, but it wouldn't feel good to me.
Right.
So I realized I needed to go a little bit deeper. So I do have like a childhood background in I was raised in unity and really deep in Kabbalah, like as a kid. And they're very open to the power of the mind and the power of the tongue and
Hmm.
and that influence on healing. And it's I had to make a return to that. I got so alienated because part of that conditioning being at that school and then going on to another elite school, I just learned what was serious, what was to
Hmm.
be taken seriously, and what was smart and what worked and what had proof and etc. But there's living proof. And a lot of what's been taught holistically is being confirmed by science, quote unquote. Um, and all science is a way of learning things. It's a way of it's a method of discovery. Um, but anyway, back to TNM. I tried everything and I wasn't feeling good. I wasn't able to move past certain barriers. In fact, I got better at repressing and I
Hmm.
got better at being able to talk about things without feeling my emotions. So I tried all of the traditional stuff. I spent a very long time in talk therapy. Then I started venturing out. I tried Reiki and I was like having these big pings. And then I had this really profound spiritual awakening that had been happening all through my teens. And I was really repressing it so hard that it was making me physically ill.
Mm.
So I decided, let me figure out what's making me physically ill. Let me go study it. And then my father started showing symptoms of dementia, early onset. So I started learning about, the brain, and my brother was diagnosed with PTSD. Later, I was diagnosed with PTSD. So I was like, I want to understand this. I want to know why this is happening. I want to know how this works. So I went down the science rabbit hole, more intellectual, more brain stuff, more without feeling. Um, so learning all that I learned and doing all the things, I was like, okay, well, why isn't this working? It's very frustrating. I did the work. Why isn't this
Yeah.
working?
Yeah.
Um, so just learning how that affected me, learning why certain things didn't work for me, learning why certain things did work. And people had started coming to me, like asking me about the things that I tried. And I was able to start um, okay, well, actually, you have this I know you to be this kind of person. I know you like learning in this way. So I don't think that would be a good place to start for you. I think you should start elsewhere. And
Mhm.
it worked, right? So enough people started asking me. I was like, okay. Then I tried a hypnotherapy session, and it was like in an hour, I did more than I did in years in talk therapy. And
It's
I was like,
wild. It's wild, isn't it?
yeah, I was overjoyed, but I was also devastated because, um it felt like there had been some kind of secret that was kept from me. And I was doing all of this suffering and searching and seeking. And of course, you don't find anything before you're meant to. But I was just like, oh my God, I spent so many years in agony. I built this life up around me
Mhm.
on the wrong things because
Well,
I wasn't able to access me.
can I hop in and ask this question too? You brought up some really important distinctions, I think, between that conscious therapy, the talk therapy, the
Mhm,
understanding why logically we do things,
mhm,
and sort of the feeling side of things, or the more woo woo, for a lack of a better term, which I think, I consider it a positive term, but hypnotherapy sort of falls under um, the alternate sort of healing category. What is it about
mhm,
that energetic form of healing? You said Reiki also had the same impact that
mhm.
accesses us at a different point and in a different way than talk therapy. What's the magic?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. From a neuroscience perspective, you are literally activating your parasympathetic nervous system with all of those modalities. Um, so it's literally that part of you that dreams, that part of you that when you're asleep, the only part of you really, it's the only state to activate if you want to heal something. So your
Why is
body,
why is
Mhm.
that?
Well, so you're breathing, right? You don't need conscious thought necessarily to breathe to sustain your life, right?
Mhm.
So that's a function of your parasympathetic nervous system. It's really just primal, it's very fundamental. It developed before any of the conscious parts of your brain. Um, in fact, the prefrontal cortex doesn't really close until your 20s. And for women, there's some evidence that it closes a little bit earlier.
Mhm.
Well, closes, it never closes, but you know what I mean,
Yep.
develops
Develop.
earlier in your 20s. Um, and for men, sometimes it's a little bit later.
Shocker.
um,
No, just kidding.
Shocker, right? Real shocker. It's like the evidence is increasingly there. But it's just the part of your brain that doesn't need your input. That's terrible. But
No.
now you can add your own input, like things like hypnotherapy, being active about like intentional breath work, being active about your sleep. It's just the part of your body that is able to perform the repair function. So we're using the conscious mind when we're doing talk therapy, and it's very important to be able to have language to put to things and to make sense of things. But it's also important to not neglect that um, deeper part of you and that baser
Mhm.
part of you because you actually make most of your decisions from there and you
Mhm.
act from that place. So
Mhm.
if there's a conflict, you're usually going to find the resolution much deeper than the conscious mind because Mhm.
Well, I'm sorry, I have so many questions as you talk. Is that because our conscious mind is constantly trying to sort of defend our decisions, and
Hmm.
it's like the defense attorney for our bad decisions, right? It's like, "But let me explain," you know? I mean, is that why?
In part, it's trying to make sense of what it's seeing.
Right.
So it also has survival concerns.
Mhm.
It gets activated on a higher level in terms of interacting with other people and structures and all these things, but it also has survival concerns. So its job is to keep processing. Your whole brain's job is to process, but your parasympathetic nervous system is there to also support your life.
Mhm.
It's trying to support your life through making sense of what it's seeing, what it's perceiving. So it just has to make sense of the very narrow picture in front of them. So
Mhm.
one of the exercises that I do is like a hemispheric connector, and that kind of kicks you into your PNS, because what's happening is when we're really into your parasympathetic nervous system, this is when we're what's happening when we're really focused on our conscious mind is sometimes we get into something called foveal view. So it's literally we lose perspective.
Hmm.
We focus on one point. So we're going to make sense of whatever's there. It may not be the full story, it may not be the actual truth, may not be what we believe, but we will make sense of it. So that's the trap the conscious mind can really fall into.
This is so fascinating. So what we're doing with hypnotherapy then is not tricking the system, but we're like going in through the back gate where so
Yeah.
you can do that healing, because the conscious mind will always sort of shut things down when it feels like it has to.
Yeah, like let's make do. This is what we're seeing. Let's make do.
Okay, wow. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I found to be I did RTT, so rapid
Mm,
transformational therapy. I don't know if
okay.
that's different in any way from what you do, but a lot of the questions I got after the fact were, well, number one, like, can they make you do anything you don't want to do? So please address that,
Mm-hmm.
because I know what the answer is, but I think there's this
There's a
unwavering concern.
fear.
Yes, there's
Yeah.
a fear, because we've all seen those shows, Keely, at like
Mm-hmm.
resorts where the hypnotherapists come up and they make people like take off their shirts, and they're like, but I don't want to do
Act like a
anything.
chicken.
Act like a chicken.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So
Yeah.
please dispel that for us.
We hear all the stories. I was recently asked about this for a Forbes article too, so I'm glad to like expand. Um, there's this fear again, right, that you're not in control, but it's really just more you. So when we're accessing your subconscious, you're really in control. The hypnotherapist is really there as a guide. So it's like, this is your land. I'm the real estate agent. Let me just show you around. I
Mhm.
kind of know the layout, the basic layout. Here are some quirks that I know about, but this is
Hmm.
you. So I want to find out more about you. And I think I have a very strong intuitive ability. So I go a little bit deeper with the hypnotherapy. So sometimes we're walking around with inherited traumas. So
Don't even get me
past life,
started,
past
girl.
generation. Yeah.
Yes. Wait.
Hmm.
This is like a whole separate thing, but like, did you ever hear the theory that our trauma goes 7 generations
Yes.
back? Okay, is there truth to that? There has to
There's
be.
definitely truth to that, but some people, I have clients who can go further back on their timeline, like, right? But in your body, there's supposed to be 7 generations, 7 lives.
I I mean, everyone who listens to this show knows that I'm like I fully buy into all this stuff, and I consider myself a very intelligent person, but to
Yeah.
not believe in the spiritual side of things just seems so foolish. But
Hmm.
I do genuinely feel that I have reactions to things that my own personal life experiences don't warrant. I have
Mm.
visceral, and I feels like it can only be explained sometimes by the energy passed down. But now we're getting like super
Hmm.
woo. But I don't know. Anyway, you saying that just really rings true, and I feel like
Yeah.
addressing some of that would be a really interesting experience. So you do some of that work with your clients too.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's part of why they find my work so special, because it goes way back and it allows them, there's like an intergenerational aspect that people need healing about. People need healing for. I used to be terrified when I would see my dad, and kids have trouble with like object permanence, and it gets
Yeah.
worse if you have ADHD. But it's like I would get really anxious sometimes, and I would see my dad leave for work. I found out in my 20s, my great grandfather, and like, it was like a really powerful, visceral fear. I found out in my 20s, my great grandfather, who was probably the last, a huge, great love story in our family, my great grandmother and my great grandfather. He went to work one day, had a freak accident, didn't come home. And
Mm.
my grandmother was standing by the door. I would go and stand by the door
Ugh, that's
for
crazy.
years as a kid. And it would always be when my dad went to work, I'd be like, oh my God. It's like made no sense. But, and
That's
you would think normal kid thing, but it was deeper.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I totally believe that.
yeah.
I like want to do a
Yeah.
whole separate episode about this, but we don't have time. Okay, so wait,
Yeah.
let's get back on with the neurointuitive method because I want
Yes.
people, considering talking to you, sort of like
Mhm.
really understand the process. So, give us an example of something a client might be struggling when they work with you. How it looks to
Mhm.
work with you. Is this like a multi-session thing,
Mhm.
and maybe something that they end up feeling or some sort of revelation they end up having after you go through the sessions.
Yeah. So usually subconscious change, I like to give a timeline of about 6 weeks.
Okay.
Um, so you feel really great immediately when you take the charge off a particular trauma. And I think you would know this because you've done some hypnotherapy. You feel
Mhm.
great immediately. And then the following weeks, things start to settle.
Mhm.
So things, beliefs shift around. So one issue that I've been seeing come up lately has been anxiety
Mm.
and stagnation in my client base. So, anxiety is really, again, a thing about control.
Mhm.
So, it has chemical implications, but if you address some of the beliefs, you can have real relief.
Mhm.
So, I've been seeing a lot of that because I think people are feeling quite uncertain,
Mhm.
reasonably, with the state of the world, but people are feeling quite
What are you
uncertain.
talking about? It's been very calm in our world lately.
Very chill.
Very chill, very chill.
So just seeing a lot of anxiety. So it's like anxiety shows up in different ways for people who are high achievers and high performers. So what we think of as anxiety, like most high achievers don't necessarily have the luxury, it's not a luxury, but don't necessarily have um, major external panic attacks.
Mhm.
Or when they do, they're alone. They're somewhere no one can see them.
Right.
But usually the breakdown is inward, is
Mhm.
very inward. So people who have repetitive thoughts or they just get really anxious about particular outcomes that they have no control over. Right.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it just looks very different. And
Mhm.
talk
Mhm.
therapy is extremely helpful in terms of identifying beliefs. But again, it's a parasympathetic response that you're getting. That
Right.
spike in adrenaline, that the heart beating,
Right.
the racing thoughts, like that's motivated by the PNS. So if you can go there and address it, it's very helpful. So that's something that you can work on pretty quickly,
Right.
given the depending on how deep it is or what's hooked to.
Mhm.
Um, so I just worked on that with someone in one session. I haven't necessarily seen a lot of one-on-one clients lately. I've been living life.
Yes,
I've been
we love to
I've been
hear
having
it.
a time. I've been traveling. I've been like living. But
I love it. Yes.
but
Yes, 'cause we
yeah,
work to
so
live, we don't live to work.
exactly. No, but I do love my work. But I've been seeing one-on-one clients, but one thing I also do is that I have a product suite. So particular issues, it takes a certain set of beliefs to support a particular set point, upper limit, whatever it is that you're looking to raise. So in terms of I have something called a love bundle. So that deals with inner child stuff. It deals with trust wounding. It deals with intimacy. It
Mhm.
deals with bodily autonomy. So there's a certain set of beliefs that you need to support a certain worldview. And the neurointuitive method is always trying to ask, what are those?
Mhm.
And how can we shift them? How can we unhook them?
And if we are
So,
working one-on-one with you, that sort of
mhm,
involves get to know your like you said, get to know your client, how they best
mhm.
learn, how they best absorb
Yeah.
information, all of that stuff.
Yeah, I do a full mind map. So that's where I get the learning style. That's where I get the full history. Um, yeah, what this break was facilitated by is that I was able to do some kind of longer term work last year.
Mhm.
in longer containers. So 12-week, 6 month,
Mm-hmm.
etc. And I
Mm-hmm.
saw people every week and we did a whole mind map and we did from 0 to whenever. And we
Right.
found some of their core wounding. And then we went back from there. And then by the time we're into it, we're usually able to see what the next level is in terms of what they want to achieve in the future.
Oh,
So
that's
that's
interesting.
helpful. And the timeline goes both ways. So you can implant goals and you can also go back and heal trauma.
And some of the things that people come back and say, what are they noticing after working with
Oh,
you?
it's like they feel like themselves and they
Yeah.
don't have to defend it or explain it. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just like once you feel like yourself, you're like way more in quote unquote alignment.
Right.
So the world responds to you differently. And
Right.
of course, with every the thing about I like to call them set points, with every new level, there's a new set point. But once you know how you work, it's not a big deal.
Meaning, like when we next encounter some sort of issue or obstacle, we know sort of we're reprogrammed how to sort of work through it better.
Yeah, you know how to work through it better. And also, you're able to go to the heart of an issue much quicker. I have one client he's really funny. He's like, he joked, I haven't lost a case since I worked with you because he always understands communication.
Ooh.
Because he's not coming in with his own stuff. Like, and
Yes.
people can put
Yes.
their stuff in a sack out to the side, but it's repressed, so it's going to show up. But he's not coming in with his own stuff in terms of, well, in this negotiation, I want this and this and this, and them not giving it to me means this and this and this about me, and it's just cooler, um, calmer, definitely more in tune, and you hear the subtext because you're not so concerned with how you're being perceived.
Right. Isn't it
So,
just so shocking to understand how much of life and problems in life aren't really about you? It's just about the other person. And
mm-hmm,
like, I feel like that was one of
mm-hmm,
my big revelatory moments as an adult. I'm like, wow. I mean, not saying
yes.
I'm doing things perfectly. I'm certainly not. But
Well,
when you
you're not
take back
supposed
and
to.
right, exactly. When I hear you explain something like what your client said and the gift of being able to step back, to listen, to remove yourself, you start to
Hmm.
realize, oh my God, it's not about me after all. Like this person who's been a jerk to me or this, you know,
Yeah.
it's about both of us. And this person is reacting based on their traumas. And like,
Yes.
I don't know why that was just a huge moment for me as an adult. And
Yeah.
I credit, hypnotherapy for sort of too helping pull me out of myself, out of my conscious mind.
Yes. Yes. Because you need it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, just being able to hear what people are actually saying and what
Right.
they're meaning and not taking things personally. Everybody, again, this U-shaped space in the world, most people
Mhm.
are very concerned about what's going on with them, and
Mhm.
that's how it's supposed to be.
Mhm.
But you can start projecting from that place if you're not handling your side of the street.
Mhm. I love it.
Um, so yeah, he's really funny.
That's
He
like
tells
that's a
everyone about me. But yeah.
yeah, that's a really glowing review.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love it. Well, we are close to the end of things here, and sorry, I just got a comment. I want to make sure it's not a question. I want to tell people how to connect with you and follow you on all of the
Yes.
socials. So tell us where you most often show up and the best way to reach you.
Okay. So I show up a lot on both Instagram and Twitter. You can
Okay.
hear my thoughts on Twitter if you're interested in that. And I am at Keylee Miracle, and I'm also at KeyleeMiracle.com. And you can also type in the neurointuitive.com for the same thing.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your gifts with us and your wisdom for this period of
Thank you
time.
for
I'm so
having
grateful.
me.
Yeah, I hope this encourages people. What's so ironic about the universe and the world is I was just talking to a friend who went to hypnotherapy today about this, and we ended up
Mm-hmm.
rescheduling it for today and just
Mm-hmm.
getting to be able to express to people how helpful this method can be is cool.
Yes.
It's cool. I'm really
Don't be
glad.
afraid. It's just you.
It's yes, listen, and everybody's got their stuff. So
Hmm.
don't be embarrassed at all. Um,
Ever.
yes, Keely, thank you again for spending some time with me today.
You. Thank you. It was such a pleasure. You asked great questions. I mean, I would expect nothing less,
Thank
but
you.
you're fabulous at your job.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. That means a lot. Thank you. And guys, thank you for listening and or watching. I will link all of Keely's websites and socials and show notes so you can check that out. And listen, I don't want to sound preachy, but I'm going to be internet mom for a second and tell you, please, please try hypnotherapy, rapid transformational therapy, some sort of therapy that addresses the parts of you that your conscious mind isn't willing to address, because I promise you, you will experience just some pretty incredible revelations if you do. I can't recommend this highly enough. And we're so fortunate to be in a world now where we can like access this like amazing information and these people digitally. So definitely take advantage. Okay, I'm off my soapbox. Rate, review, guys. That actually makes a huge difference in getting these episodes out to people. So just do that on Apple Podcasts, please, if you have a moment. And yeah, we'll be back next week with more good stuff here on We Gotta Talk. Thank you again for listening. Bye.